Saturday's open practice gave fans and insiders their first real glimpse of what the 2025 Hawkeyes might look like. Today, we're breaking down everything we saw, who stood out, who's climbing the depth chart, and what we didn't see might raise a few eyebrows.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. I've been covering the Hawkeyes for over 20 years on the radio here in the state of Iowa, including currently on the Iowa Sports Radio Network. You can hear me each weekday from noon to 2 talking the world of sports and a lot of Hawkeyes on the Iowa Sports Radio Network with stations in Des Moines, Sioux City, Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, and the Quad Cities. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Well, expectations, they are all over the place. I know for fans of the Hawkeyes this season, we will talk about where the expectations maybe should be for this squad. Of course, we'll get into a glimpse, including what was the best position group from the open practice over the weekend, but that's where we begin. Observations from what we saw, and we're going to begin the conversation with the most important position. Yes, that is, of course, the quarterback position. So before we kind of dive in deep into all the position groups, what we saw, takeaways, those kind of things, I want to start just with an overview, remembering what this is. Now, we've seen a wide range of these open kids' day practices of what we've seen. For the most part, the offense always behind the defense. So that's usually what we see, and it's been hideous at times. I mean, you go back to just a season ago when Cade McNamara struggled mightily. And he was not alone. All the quarterbacks really struggled in that open practice. And our takeaway maybe should have been that there were bigger concerns, but I was buying things, hook, line, and sinker, right? And that's what happens, I think, when you start to go down the path of talking about a team like this every single day, is you start to talk yourself into the hype a little bit more because it is more enjoyable. But I think there are a few things today that we are going to bump the brakes a little bit more, and maybe some more concerns, and we will get into them throughout the day. Let's go, though, first to quarterback, and I think that's where it was. Beginning practice, everything looked very good for Mark Gronowski. There were some lowlights, though, and some pretty glaring lowlights. From a pick six as the screen game really all day long. Just couldn't get anything going. Now, remember, the defense has seen these plays. They've been able to see kind of the tendencies that lead to them calling screens. And that's why a lot of times it is difficult to set up screen plays when you're going up against your own defense in practice. But that aside, pick six, a throw you just can't have. Fumbled exchanges. And Kirk Ferentz talked about that after practice, is they'll get that cleaned up. You know, Kirk didn't seem overly concerned with some of the negative areas. And when you go through and you look at this squad and hear from some of the guys on Friday during Iowa Media Day, you can really tell that I don't want to go back to Kirk Ferentz, 12 years ago and Fat Cats, right? But last year's team coming into it, you know, you had so many veterans back. You had so many 5th and 6th year guys coming back for another season. It wasn't that they're resting on their laurels, because that's not fair. But maybe that drive, that motivation wasn't at the same level that it very well could be this season. And there's a lot of reasons for that and other ways that it can happen. I mean, go back. Look, if you don't get beat at the gun by Iowa State, how different that season looked. But it deflated the balloon so quickly in the season of what could have been. And when the talk was playoff, and I think it was a realistic talk if everything clicked, and it didn't. But when you're talking about a season like that, things can fall apart very quickly. And I think you're seeing a renewed sense of focus, a renewed passion. It has a different feeling. I'll just put it that way. It feels a whole lot different than it did off season. Now, I wasn't able to sniff it out last season, admittedly. And so that's on me, but this does feel different. Will it be better? Who knows? Now, the schedule is much more difficult than it was a year ago, though there isn't Ohio State like there was a season ago. When you're talking about 4 teams that won double-digit games, you're talking about 3 college football playoff teams from a year ago in Penn State, Indiana, and Oregon all on the schedule this year. Iowa State won double-digit games, plus the rivalry games that are seemingly always going to come down to the wire with Wisconsin and Minnesota and Nebraska, and which you're going to have those in the aforementioned Iowa State. It's a difficult schedule, more difficult than it was a year ago. But let's get back to the topic at hand. Start with Gronowski, and that's where we were beginning the conversation. A couple of miscues. I think I have to remember and I have to remind myself that he's still shaking off some rust, right? I mean, he's still a guy that is coming off shoulder surgery, didn't play. He is going into a new system. So I think that's on me a little bit more. And I need to remind myself because I was bringing the hype up to another level. And I did the same with Cade McNamara. And I don't want to fall into that trap again. Is it going to be an improvement? I don't think there's any doubt. But how big can that improvement actually be at the quarterback position? Maybe I've overstated things. And we'll see on that front. But it led me, what we saw on Saturday, just to pump the brakes a little bit more. Still love Hank Brown. You everyday listeners certainly know that Hank Brown has been, for me, the heir apparent at the number 2 spot. I thought he was brought in for a reason, and certainly he very well could have been our starter this year. Mark Gronowski wasn't there. Really like what we saw from also Jeremy Hecklinski. You know, Hecklinski, a smaller guy, but he's got that moxie. And he's got the ability to move around and make plays, to show that athleticism, to do the kind of things that Iowa doesn't have quarterbacks like that very often. And we go back to Drew Tate. I think the comparisons are very apt for what we saw. But not only that, but Hecklinski, he's got swagger to him. Now, this is not a wilting violet, right? He's not going to be sitting in the corner. He is there and he believes in himself, even if he is 5'11". He doesn't care. He's going to go out there and he's going to make plays and certainly showed an ability to do that. But Hank Brown, the ball just cruises out of his hands. One more thing, observation on Gronowski is I don't know if it was just kind of the practice plan or what, and really the quarterbacks as a whole, but they're taking shots. And even last year, you know, we just saw it so rarely because they weren't able to do it. Wide receiver depth wasn't there, just didn't have the opportunities. And how much more aggressive we're going to see Iowa this year and Tim Lester in year number 2 of this offense, kind of playing with all the toys and all the gadgets that he has. I think that's something to get excited about this offense this year. Over to the running back spot and our observations here from open practice. Nathan McNeil, the true freshman, boy, the hype has been real about him. There's just a certain gear and ability, a understanding of what they're trying to do in the blocking scheme and his ability to set up blocking, watch, and have the patience. You know, patience is definitely a virtue when you're talking about being a running back in his own blocking scheme. And he has that kind of patience. And you can see that it works for him. Now, will there be carries? And that's to be seen. They're likely going to play 4 running backs this year, injuries aside. But Moulton was out. Probably one of the more disappointing aspects. I wanted to see Terrell Washington Jr. out there. Just want to see kind of the different punch and the different things that they can do with him. Guy that was at wide receivers, move back and forth. And I know they're very high on. And Jazion Patterson is who he is. He's a little bit bigger, but he's fine. He's competent. I don't think he's any kind of game breaker, any kind of huge difference maker, but a good, solid veteran is what you're going to get. And then the other young guys, both Dahl and Williams put it on the turf once, so clean that up. Kirk mentioned that, and that's going to happen. But you also saw Brevin Dahl, and that speed is real out there on the field. And can they find some kind of avenue here? Is he still another year away from really seeing considerable playing time? We'll see on that front. Let's wrap up here as we're talking about the skill position players offensively and go to wide receiver. Another name that I bring up a ton, and I've been waiting and waiting and waiting because we're now into year number of Seth Anderson. We've talked about him a lot this year. You know what you have from Jacob Gill. You know, as I was talking about Jazzy and Patterson, you know, he's just solid. Jacob Gill, I think, is a little bit more than that, but solid, competent, good. But there's not a ridiculous ceiling. Jacob Gill's not going to suddenly turn into a guy that's catching 80 balls and averaging 15 yards and has 11 touchdowns. That's not Jacob Gill. Oh, he's solid, dependable, knows what he's doing, is going to block, going to do everything that you want as an Iowa wide receiver. And then Reese Vanderzee, I mean, the tremendous upside that he has. And then fits in next, likely Seth Anderson. And I go back to a game, maybe it was a Washington game, regardless, where they ran a corner out with him. And he got behind it, just McNamara missed on the throw. And when you look at Seth Anderson, big time speed, crisp route running. It's always been health with him. A healthy senior year, I think, can be a big year for Seth Anderson. And then you get into the other guys. Speaking of route running, one thing that jumped out just going through as they were getting warmed up was looking at what they have in that room and some of the other guys that they just fit, right? They the depth, I think, is real. I think this is something that is going to be a factor. And with Sam Phillips, who's still he's a little guy out there, right? As we talked about. He's little, but I think he's going to be impactful. I think he's going to be a guy that is going to make some big time plays. So those are the skill position groups. Tight end, didn't see much again. I just think the days that the tight end is a huge part of the offense under Tim Lester, not going to be the case. It's going to be more about getting the ball to the wide receivers. We'll see. I'd always done it in the past and some other stops, but this is just going to be your number two. You don't want to overreact, but I think we're going to see more and more that the wide receivers are going to be a much bigger part of the offense. And because of that, the tight end certainly is going to dwindle down in their usage throughout the course of the season. What is the best unit that we saw on the field? Answer might surprise you. We're going to talk offensive line, the defensive line, the defense as the whole as we continue. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. We've all been there, logging on early for to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime. You can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. I love their look at where you're going to be inside the arena, inside where your concert venue. You get a panoramic seat view. There's no surprises of where you're going to sit. And the best part of Game Time for me, the price. What you pay is the price that you actually see. That's right. No more hidden fees. How many times has it happened to you? You get to that checkout and that sticker shock hits you. Not the case with Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Trent Condon back with you once again on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for being with us and making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Hey, if you're watching us over on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get up to 5,000 subscribers. If you're listening on the audio side, 5-star reviews all helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. So as we're wrapping up the offense, let's take a look at the offensive line as they've been rotating through, and we've seen a bunch of different guys that have been out there, a bunch of different guys that have been working through that left tackle position. It's the three guys that we mentioned: Trevor Lauk, Jack Doetzler, and Bryce George. Now, Bryce George didn't play much left tackle. In fact, he didn't play a ton of tackle overall. It was a whole bunch of interior play, and the reason for that is Bo Stevens being out. And with Bo Stevens being out, that definitely changed the equation. Something that we hoped for, we talked about last week, as we were hopeful that we were going to be able to finally see kind of everything together, right? All encompassing what this line's going to look like, et cetera, and not the case. We obviously did not get that. So with Bo Stevens out, George was playing a little bit more inside. You had Leighton Jones, that was the starter at the left guard position, and this was the day that Trevor Lauk got the start at left tackle. And outside of a couple of moments, I thought he looked really solid. Now, the right side of the offensive line with Pieper and out at right tackle with Jennings Dunker, they were outstanding. They were really good there. Logan Jones in the middle, and we talked a lot about Logan. And when he took over as a starter a couple of years ago, look, I was hard on him. And it wasn't that he wasn't Tyler Linderbaum, because that's, well, an impossible standard almost for anybody to take over. And that wouldn't be fair. And I wouldn't do that. But it was the snapping issues that we continually saw, both out of the shotgun and then at times that delay coming back there. And we saw more issues again. Now he's working with a new quarterback in Gronowski. So, okay, they're figuring that part out. But boy, there's just this lingering thought in the back of my mind. And God, do I hope I'm wrong on this one. I do not want this to be the case at all. But I don't know. And you get a little bit of a hitch, right? You get a little bit of an extra thought. You swing a golf club and that happens. Maybe it's the same thing with snapping the football because Logan Jones is too talented to have to worry about things like that. And it felt like last season he overcame them. Let's just chalk it up to a bad day, but maybe file this one away for a little bit later on. Speaking of that offensive line, Michael Mislinski, we talked about him a little bit last week, and a guy that very well could surprise. Interesting. Tom Kaker did an interview with him at Media Day, and mentioned that Mislinski has another year of eligibility. So even if he isn't able to break through this season, I mean, there's going to be a chance for him to be a starter next year in the middle of that offensive line, and a guy that has battled so many different injuries. Also had a brother that was battling cancer. I mean, this guy's had a ton on his plate. And for a guy that had so many great offers coming out of high school, chose Iowa, coming from Florida, to stick it out and now have this opportunity and have an extra year on top of it, this could be one of those feel-good stories. And really, like, now he got banged up a little bit. Sounds like he's going to be okay, but overall, that's one to keep an eye on. Mentioned the right side of the offensive line, tremendous. And I like Lauk. I went into it after talking to Kirk out in Vegas for Big Ten football media days. I had the feeling that Bryce George was maybe going to be more a part of the conversation. Not that he's out. Remember, this is a guy making a transition up from D2, and maybe his upside for this year is a little bit higher, but I'm going to change my tune now, and I think it is going to be Trevor Lauk, where I was initially before I went to Vegas. Then I changed after Vegas to Bryce George. Now I'm back on the Trevor Lauk train, and we'll see with 2.5 weeks to go before we actually get to a football game how much that changes by the time we get there. Bo Stevens, we'll see on that injury front. Definitely a guy. 21 career starts in his career. Need Bo Stevens out there. The best group overall for me was the defensive line. And again, we just talked about the offensive line wasn't terrible by any means, but it wasn't just that they looked good, that you saw a little bit of Aaron Graves, Jonah Pace out there plugging gaps, Hawthorne when he was out there, the two transfers, Pace and Hawthorne, really looking the part, doing it without Jeremiah Pittman as he works his way back and trying to get himself healthy for the start of the season, what that's going to mean for that rotation up front. But then you go to the defensive ends. We know Herkett, Llewellyn, two guys that shown the ability to get to the quarterback and what they've been able to do. And then you have Brian Allen, who shows up again. It's an open practice. You know what's going to happen. You know we're going to see Brian Allen making a play, and he does it again. And great to see him healthy because we know how important he is to this group. But then you throw in the depth. And though there was no Shanike out there, Yosei Epinesa was starting to get some reps with the two. They shown that depth continuing to build on the outside. Joseph Anderson, another guy, adding weight, getting bigger, and looking like maybe he can be a guy situationally that can be out there at defensive end and help out. Devin Kennedy in the middle at defensive tackle, another young guy that can help out. So the excitement, I think, builds for this defensive line, not just because of what they have, but also what it still can be. They're growing some dudes up front on the defensive front. And they're going to have to. I still believe because of the questions at both linebacker and the defensive backfield, certainly at the cornerback spot, that this defensive line has to take a huge step forward. They have to be elite. And they have to be an elite level basically all season long. If Iowa's defense is going to be great again, not just good, because it's going to be good, great, elite, whatever superlative you want to use, if that's going to happen, the defensive line has to play at an incredibly high level. Let's go to linebacker. Carson Shire. Yeah, that dude, he's a dude, right? If healthy. How many if healthies we talked about today? Seth Anderson, if healthy. Here's another one. Carson Shire, if healthy. Those two guys, they have a healthy senior season. Look out. We're talking potential all Big Ten. I believe in the upside that much for both of these guys. He looked real out there. Now, I told you last week, I had somebody that had me just pump the brakes a little bit, that it was just automatically Jaden Harrell. And it's not that Jaden Harrell isn't going to be the starter, because I still anticipate he will, but they just said, keep an eye out on Jaden Montgomery. And Jaden Montgomery, I thought in the middle, looked pretty good. And then you got that group of young linebackers for Preston Reese and Cam Buffington, even guys like um, Derek Weisskopf, those guys that look, the gap is not significant, at least from what we saw. And again, I'll also need to put this caveat in there. This is one practice, right? But the gap at linebacker between the old guys and the young guys, not significant. It very well could come down to reps, just understanding the playing time. And I have a feeling that it's going to be pretty close here. That if we see the veterans struggle, that Wallace and company is not going to be afraid to make a change pretty quickly, and maybe not the same kind of rope that we've seen in the past with some of the veterans. Finally, as we go position by position here, let's go over to defensive back. And to me, because I was going to be fine, certainly when there's just two linebackers out there, we're talking about 4 or 5 defensive backs. Safeties all look great. And we'll see about Entringer. He played a ton of strong safety, not a whole lot of cash. If Lutmer becomes the guy at the cash position and it's full-time over at strong safety for Cohen Entringer, Xavier Wampa, you can see it, looks, and just talking to him Friday, more comfortable, more understanding, hearing what Wampa had to say, you can tell that this was a move that just fits him incredibly well. But the cornerback spot, so you're without TJ Hall. A lot of people have been waiting for Shaheed Barrows, the South Dakota transfer at cornerback. That Barrows was going to be a guy that was going to maybe even step in day one and be a starter. And if that's the case, he's got a lot of ground to make up because TJ Hall wasn't out there. Jalen Watson, who I believe is going to be part of the top 3, at least initially, wasn't out there. And yet, it was Deshaun Lee and it was Rashad Godfrey. Those were your starters at the cornerback. I also saw a little bit of Alex Moda, and that's a great story, too. We're talking about Mislinski and the injuries that he has gone through. Boy, Alex Moda. Just remember him at one of the practices, open practices, him just going around and with a little scooter thing, with his leg up, and a guy that was a tremendous athlete at Marion. Was he going to be a wide receiver? Was he going to be a defensive back? And he's moved back and forth, and hopefully a healthy home for him because there's a ton of upside with his game. Look, they got a bunch of guys that they're playing at cornerback and trying to figure out those young guys. Saw a number of different people getting those opportunities out there. We'll kind of see what it's going to look like at this spot. TJ Hall, it doesn't sound like anything overly significant at this point. Doesn't appear to be anything, that you're worried about him missing the start of the season, but it's bone bruise and anything can happen on that front. Let's hope for the best for TJ Hall. Definitely need him out there in 100%. Same for Watson coming off that soft tissue injury. All right, we continue here. Locked On Hawkeyes. Still got to get into the special teams and expectations. Where should they be with this Iowa football team? We'll do that as we continue on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Trent Condon back with you one final time. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. Thanks for being with us and making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube or a 5-star review on the audio side. Special teams were elite. Now, I think another just observation is all right. You walk in, there's Reese Dakin just bombing punts, right? I mean, just hitting with ease. Ones that be 65-yarders in the game. He's got an incredibly strong leg. Last year, we saw the strong leg, but it wasn't very consistent, at least compared to what we dealt with before with Torrey Taylor. Reese Dakin's going to be a dude, though. He is going to be an absolute weapon. And then after showing off the strong leg, the next one is, remember, Torrey, the emergence that we saw from him and the growth that we saw every single year. And when you're looking about Dakin, remember, a younger guy, but I think you're also going to get into those same kind of conversations, is inside the 10-yard line, inside the 5-yard line, the backspin, the getting the ball to stop, all those different things that Torrey Taylor got so good at, punting it just so his gunner could get down there and catch it inside the 5-yard line. That will be the next step for Dakin. But in terms of leg strength, that is not a concern. Drew Stevens is Drew Stevens. But good. There's a battle, a long snapper, a couple of guys fighting for that. But all that aside, it's just as they were going through all that, saw Caden Bird, the freshman out of Bettendorf. He's out there. He's not Drew Stevens, but a good piece for the future, certainly, and a guy that's going to be competing for the job next year. It's just the lack of depth. And with the scholarship limits that were put in, 105. No, now we're going to call that back. I think this is something that's going to be impactful and probably impactful as a whole. And we think about just how tremendous special teams have been really ever since LeVar took over. And the kicking game's always been really solid, but just overall special teams is how impactful is that going to be? Certainly with the specialists, because you just don't have the same number of guys. And what's that mean for reps and trying to get those live game reps and doing it without slowing down the leg of your specialist. So just something of a file away for the back of your mind. But that's a look through all kind of the position groups and what we saw on Saturday. Before we wrap up, finally, where should expectations be now? And I mentioned maybe I got over the tips of my skis a little bit on Gronowski and my expectation that right away he was going to hit the ground running, that he was going to be out there just at an incredibly high level and he was going to put together a season, like we haven't seen in a long time at the quarterback spot. And again, it still can happen, but I went from talking about that ceiling and maybe getting into that conversation a little bit too much. Tap the brakes, bring it back. Let's live in reality. That's what we try to do and what this team is going to look like. And I come back to, I think there's going to be highs. I still think this team is going to pull a major upset this year. I think they are going to beat Oregon this season or a big time upset. Maybe it's Penn State, whatever it is. I think there is going to be a major upset for this team this season. But then taking it a step further, those toss-up games, man, there's so many of them. Wisconsin, look, the record's not going to be good because of the schedule that they have. They're not going to be as bad as they are. Look, they went back to the drawing board. They went back and decided in year number 3, you know what, Luke Fickell, let's go back to the identity of Wisconsin football. Is Iowa going to put 42 on them this year? I don't think so. The Iowa State game. Look, Iowa's won every game since 2011 and Jack Trice, and there's been so many down to the wire over there. Is the ball going to continue to bounce Iowa's way? Minnesota, the close games that they had. Iowa was cooked a year ago in the first half before coming roaring back in the second half of that one. Of course, Nebraska at the end of the year. And Iowa, speaking of getting breaks and making plays, and it's happened seemingly every single year. I come back to 7-5, 8-4. And I know it's boring, but that's where my expectation is. I can't, from what we saw on Saturday, get to those high level marks. 10-2, 11-1. I think this team's going to be good, but it comes back to the schedule for me. The schedule, more than anything, is going to be the reason that this team didn't have those heights. Same schedule as it was a year ago. I think it'd be a different conversation. That's where my expectations are now. Let me know where yours are. You can hit us up on the comments on YouTube. If you're watching over there, always give us a shout out. Always appreciate that and hearing from most every one of you over on the YouTube side of things. If you're on the audio side, leave us a 5-star review. Greatly appreciate it. We're with you each and every day. The Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. A big thank you to everydayers with us each and every day. We got a busy week. We'll have some more observations. We'll start to dive a little bit deeper into what we saw. There's a couple of places, including Tom Kakert. He's got a rundown of the statistical profile. We're going to have some interviews this week and a whole lot more coming your way as we count down to kickoff. Plus, we're going to talk some basketball. Haven't been talking much basketball at all. Want to put kind of a bow on the off season. There's another working out video that was put out by Iowa Hoops last week. Some bad news on the recruiting front. So there's a lot to get into there as well. We got you covered on the basketball front. Can't forget about hoops, as it's going to be an exciting year in Iowa City. Your team every day on the Locked On Network. Don't forget, we also got the Portal show. If you're looking for the latest on the Portal recruiting news, does a great job over there. You can find the Portal on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. We got a lot coming your way as we get ready for Iowa football 2025. Until then, go Hawks.